maybe we'll get started in the interest of time, and hopefully our third panelist will join us as we go through, and then they'll just get lobbied all the questions that you guys have already answered. But again, I just want to thank anyone that's tuning in for joining us. And I want to welcome you all. I want to welcome our panelists, Sharon and Donna. I'll introduce myself as well. I'm moderating our panel discussion today. My name is Elizabeth Van Roten, the Director of Support Services at the Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey. And as you might be aware, or if you're not aware, March is National Brain Injury Awareness Month. And so it is a time that is dedicated to raising awareness about brain injury through story sharing, amplifying the voices of individuals impacted by brain injury. So today we have a panel of brain injury survivors who are graciously, and we thank them for sharing their stories with us today. I also want to just highlight a few things that are happening around brain injury awareness. The Brain Injury Awareness Day on March 19th in Trenton. Please join us if you can. Perfect, Jonathan's hopping on. Hi, Jonathan. So we are joined by our third and final panelist, Jonathan. And I was just kind of, Jonathan, so you were, hi, how you doing? Going through just, why we're here today, right? Which is Brain Injury Awareness Month. And so we have a lot of great things going on at Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey to help raise awareness. I encourage you, you're joining us on Facebook Live to explore our social medias, to learn more about what we have going on in ways that you can support the brain injury community. So thank you again for tuning in. Thank you to our panelists. And thank you for being here to help us raise awareness. And so I want to just kind of jump right in, and I've kind of introduced myself. So I think it only makes sense to go around and, have each of you introduce yourself, share a little bit about who you are, and then maybe a little bit about, how you came to sustain or your brain injury or what happened that you have now a brain injury and that you're dealing with. So I'm just going to go around my screen in no particular order. Sharon, do you want to go first and share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me. This is, great to share the story, and it's good for me too. It gives me, a little sense of purpose. So I found that has been really important in my recovery. I received a brain injury back in 2011. I fell off a ladder, and I was knocked unconscious and ended up at the hospital, et cetera, et cetera. But I was not diagnosed with the brain injury then. I wasn't diagnosed. I had CAT scans. I don't think I had an MRI. But anyway, I wasn't diagnosed for 5 years. And that made a huge difference. When I was finally diagnosed, and it was really just because I had a really good neurologist, and I just said, I've never been the same since my fall. And she listened. And I think that's, someone listening is really important. And you may have to say it, you could be embarrassed, because I was embarrassed because I felt I wasn't the same mentally. And one of my biggest reasons for saying that was my memory was pretty much shot. And I was known for my memory, probably annoyingly so, I'll add that. But anyway, I was, and then I had no memory. So I finally had a CAT scan, I had an MRI, which also didn't show it. And I say that because diagnosis has been one of my big reasons for doing advocacy since the brain injury. So, but I had to do psychological testing, and that's when they found that I had a brain injury and that my processing speed had slowed down. And then I was able to get treatment. And so that's how I began my quest to improve and to get better. And, every day it's interesting. I have to say that. It's all very interesting. It's a new purpose. It's a new, a, a new jump start. I'm older. I'm kind of semi-retired, but I have a purpose, and that's important.
Thank you, Sharon. And such an interesting point in terms of, and this is why the question's phrased this way, is like, when did it happen? Because when was it diagnosed can oftentimes be a very different answer from when it happened. So thank you for highlighting that. Donna, do you want to share a little bit?
Sure. Excuse me. My name is Donna Sutherland. I live at the beautiful Jersey Shore. I am semi-retired. I was laid off of work a few years ago and decided to not go back to full-time corporate and start my own consulting business. So that's kind of a little bit about me personally. Um, my injury took place when I fell down my steps in late September. So this is pretty recent.
Mhm.
I have 26 steps in my house. I have 13 up to one floor, lucky number 13 up to one floor, and lucky number 13 up to the second floor. And unfortunately, I tend to treat myself as if I'm a lot younger than I am. So I move very quickly. And I had gotten an alert on my phone that my DoorDash arrived. And I went down to get it and I fell. And I was unconscious for a very long period of time. This was probably, DoorDash came probably at about 7 o'clock at night. And I remember a little bit about waking up and going upstairs, and then I must have gone to sleep and I woke up the next morning and my face was full of blood and I knew I was in trouble. I was bleeding actually from my right ear. And I called my best friend, and she came over and called an ambulance. And I was actually at Jersey Shore Medical Center for 4 days. And I was diagnosed with a complex concussion. So I had a hematoma, and I think that's what it's called. And it was, probably the scariest moment of my life. And what ensued were a lot of challenges and difficulties. I feel like I'm in a much better place right now, but there were a lot of obstacles to overcome in those first few months of the accident.
Thank you, Donna, for sharing. And you and Sharon kind of share the same way in which you sustain your injury and falling. And I think sometimes we recognize like motor vehicle crashes as a cause of TBI, but falls are really, really up there too. So it's important to share that, right? And to let people know that if you fall, it could be serious. So to take it seriously. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Jonathan, hi, how are you? You want to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. First of all, I apologize for getting on a couple of minutes late.
You were
Uh,
right on time.
okay, perfect.
No worries.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Frank. I had a ruptured brain aneurysm August 17th, 2009. I was at work. I was living in California at the time. I live in New Jersey now, in Monroe, New Jersey. And I was at work and I had no symptoms prior. I just got the worst headache of my life and pain down my neck. And I went into my boss's office because he had a couch there, and I asked him if I could lie down. And he noticed that my gait was off when I was walking. So I was working at Paramount Studios on the lot there, so they had their own paramedics. So he called the paramedics, and the last thing I remember, I was on the second floor of a building, and the elevator didn't go to the second floor. And I'm a bigger guy, so I remember feeling bad for the paramedics who were going to have to carry me down the stairs. So my last memory is them helping me walk down the stairs to the ambulance, and that's the last memory I have for probably about 2 months. I ended up going to the closest hospital, and they ran some tests, and they assumed that from the blood splatter pattern in my brain, they said it looked like an aneurysm, but they didn't have a neuro ICU there, so they couldn't say for sure. And then I got I got transferred to another hospital there that had the neuro ICU, and ended up spending about a month in the neuro ICU, and then let me just backtrack. Sorry, they ran other tests, and they again thought it was an aneurysm, but they couldn't find it exactly. So they were thinking about not even doing surgery. And luckily, the person who ended up being my surgeon said, "I'm going in," and he basically did blind brain surgery on me, and found the aneurysm. It was clipped, and then there's something that's called vasospasms that happen often after you have an aneurysm, which are like mini strokes. And I had three of those a few days after my surgery. Luckily, I don't have any physical disabilities from those strokes or the aneurysm. I was in the hospital for, like I said, about 6 weeks, and then I was transferred to another hospital where I was going to spend a couple of months doing inpatient rehab. And I was taken home after a week. I thought that meant I was just healed, and it wasn't. It was just that my wife at the time, it was inconvenient for her to have to go to the hospital, so she pulled me out. But here I am, many years later, and happy to be alive. Since my aneurysm. I was married 9 months before my aneurysm. I'm since divorced, but I have four kids since then, who actually live in Alabama. And yeah, that's where I am right now.
Thank you for sharing. Thank goodness that neurosurgeon decided to go in blindly, right? It's like
Yes, for sure.
it kind of goes back, I think, what Sharon was saying about finding those doctors to be able to that are willing to kind of investigate further. So speaking of that, because that sounds like one of a challenge for a lot of people is getting that diagnosis or that correct targeted treatment. What were some of the we spoke a little bit about some of the challenges, but what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced early on in your recovery? And does anyone want to go first, or we can go in the same order? If anyone's eager to share.
Well, when I fell, I hit my head. I fell off a ladder and hit my head. And but there was no blood. I was unconscious for I don't know how long. And the neighbors came because they heard the ladder go down, thankfully. But I had no blood. So I, of course, thought, oh, well, everything's just fine. Um, and I think that was another reason why at the hospital they didn't take my situation really, honestly, very seriously, because I didn't have blood. Never mind the fact that I fell 15 feet onto concrete. And I was, as Donna said, I was trying to do something that was really rather stupid. Um, in hindsight, I'm like, well, we could have just had a leak. So I think you look at things differently. I am lucky to be alive. I know that. I think the challenges for me have been diagnosis. And that took years. And it's expensive, but it's also, it's a big problem out there. And you have to be persistent, or you have to have, and I'm usually persistent, except that after a while, when you have no lot, it's hard. And I am single, so I think that makes it, I think there are challenges. So you support groups, support getting that anchoring system for you to go forward. It's, I wasn't married and didn't go through, a divorce or something, so that and then you probably expect someone to be helping you as opposed to maybe not. But I do think that was a big challenge. That's not even talking about the financial challenge, because that is also exorbitant. But it's a challenge, and things are changing. But it's a very, brain injury, really hasn't been taken seriously until 2010. So we're like 50 years behind cancer research. Um, and we have a long way to go. And it's the most complex system in our body. So it's very interesting. I have to say that. That's the one thing I think that keeps us all, you know, it's never dull. So my life is not dull. That's which is a good thing. So I hope I answered your question.
You did, yeah. It sounds like diagnosis, but then also you kind of mentioned the fact that when you don't necessarily have supports in that early part, especially when you're trying to seek diagnosis and being persistent when maybe facing no's or not the answers that you're looking for, how do you keep going when it's just maybe you that's dealing with all of that? And so those sound like pretty big challenges to me in terms of trying to get diagnosis and doing it on your own. Yeah.
Well, I was always happy. I was one of the I always liked therapy. I love physical therapy for me. I am pretty active. And I was able to play tennis again. So it's not like I certainly got everything back for a while. There have been subsequent challenges. And I think that is one thing with a brain injury that you don't really realize that your body changes and it can slow down and you keep thinking, you try to act like you did before the injury. And that has been for me my biggest not problem, but I guess an objective that I have to really work at, which is to accept me as I am now. I can't go flying out the door without thinking.
Yeah. So an overarching challenge, you talked about like early in the recovery challenges or early post-diagnosis challenge, but overarching, trying to kind of balance those things of like who you were before and what does that mean now, which we're gonna
Right.
get to later for sure. But it's a good point. Donna, do you want to share what are some of you're kind of early on, it happened at towards the end of last year, so you're kind of in that early recovery phase. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing?
Well, it's kind of interesting. Like Sharon, I live by myself, which poses its own, set of challenges when you live alone. Um, and you're on your own, especially during a difficult time like it has been. Um, I think the isolation of being by myself and not being able to do anything for an extended period of time, not being able to drive. I'm a very active person. I was going to the gym 4 or 5 times a week. That was off the table. Um, there was very limited interaction. I mean, I even found that some people I was very close to kind of backed away because it was a shocking event to them, right? And they were afraid to kind of talk to me because I might be a new person. Um, and the memory piece was a real challenge. I didn't remember uh, much about the accident, and even more so, I couldn't remember the way I used to on a day-to-day basis, similar to what Sharon mentioned. But the biggest challenge to me was uh, watching my son go through it. I have a 35-year-old son who has a family, my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter, and he basically he suffers from depression and anxiety anyway. We all do in my family. But he really went into a very, very deep depression after it happened. He lives in Boston, so he wasn't close by when it happened. And I had to be put in the care of, other people, a good friend, my sister, until he was able to get here. And I think what he saw was really frightening to him. And he basically, went into, like I said, a very deep depression. And seeing him go through that was probably the hardest part for me because I felt like I did it to him. Like Sharon said, you feel like you did something stupid, right? And I felt like how could I like not be aware of my limitations and let something like that happen and, watch my son kind of spiral out of it.
Yeah.
Mm.
So the challenge then it sounds like right now for you is a lot of the relationship changes and the impact on your family, coupled with dealing with feeling like you're guilty for those changes and that impact, right? It's a big
Yes.
challenge. Big challenge. I'm sure I saw a lot of head nodding from Sharon and Jonathan too, so probably one that's shared by a lot of people. Um, Jonathan, do you want to share what some of your biggest challenges you are that you faced early in recovery?
Yeah, sure. My biggest challenges, I think, were sort of accepting. I know it's kind of a controversial term, but new normal. Some people like using it, some don't. But I the first thing I wanted to do when I got out of the hospital was go back to work, and they're like, you know, you can't. I just sort of wanted to pick up life where it had stopped for me, um it's just it's not the same. And 16 years later, I still can't work. But it's I have a lot of issues with memory. I had a lot of issues with really, really accepting what was happening and what was going on. And I also I'm normally a very emotional guy, both positive and negative. And my affect was just off. I had no emotions about it, and it was obviously a very emotional time for me. And I remember maybe 4 months after my aneurysm, I met this woman who I had never met before, and she asked what happened to me, and I was just telling her the story. And the look on her face, this complete stranger who had never met me, the look of like concern and on her face just like struck something in me. And I that's the first time that I like teared up about what had happened to me. And from then on, it's works all over the place. But I also had, I was lucky enough not to have many physical um, disabilities, but my muscles all atrophied because I was laid up in bed for a while. So it took me a while to get back strength. And there was some talk about, like people who not necessarily didn't want to be around me, but like I remember at one point, so I have issues with sensitivity towards noise and crowds and stuff, and so I can't go into crowded restaurants or bars. And I was with a lifelong friend of mine, and I was like, "Listen, I can't go." He's like, "John, just get over it." And that was it. That comment right there ended that friendship because like, I one thing that I learned from this brain injury is who really I want and need in my life. And it's not selfish to cut people out of your life who aren't good for you. You have to be your own best advocate and be honest with everybody and with yourself. And so I guess that's from what I mean, again, it was like 16 years ago, and I still don't have many memories of the first few months after that, but it was really sort of accepting what had happened to me. And I think that, if you don't, then it's hard to start recovering from it. Um, and I did start going to support groups, which I think are invaluable, because with a brain injury, um, it's one of these things I think where like you really can only get it really how it is if you've experienced it, and even though every brain injury is different, um, brain injury survivors still share a certain respect, I guess, for one another, for lack of a better term. So I'm going off on a tangent, so I apologize.
No, no, those, I mean, I think that those were all things in line with challenges that I think a lot of people are seeing after their injury. And I know you said it's like kind of controversial, the term new normal. Some people
Yeah,
don't like to use it, some people do. But the idea of like the brain injury being a point in time and there was like a before and then what does this after look like?
correct.
And it's after for you in terms of what I mean, like the things that you had to recover from the atrophy, some of the issues that you were experiencing internally, but then the new way maybe people look at you or treat you or the way they speak to you, the thing that that person said to you, like, you know, well, that was a while ago. Maybe, you know, you're better now, or, you know, you look the same. You know, those all things that are challenges that are a different normal.
Well,
Um,
if I could, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but to that end, like I don't think that I necessarily present as somebody who with a brain injury if you just meet me, and so that's a challenge in itself because people who know me just think, oh, I'm being lazy and not doing something, and it's not the case at all. And just because I could do something one day doesn't mean I could do it the next day. And I think people have to understand that um, brain injury is sometimes a lifelong recovery, and it's so yes,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the literature and everything's pointing to this is a chronic issue, right? This isn't something that you know, we use the term recovery, but that process is chronic. It's
right.
something that you're dealing with lifelong. So definitely a challenge when people don't understand that that's the way that it is. Um, so thank you guys for sharing that. I think we touched on both immediate challenges and some of the overarching themes and challenges that you see kind of as you continue to live with brain injury. Um, so what I'll ask next is, and we talked a little bit about it, but in terms of your day-to-day life, we know that brain injury can affect people differently in different ways, but how has living with brain injury impacted your daily life, whether from a physical standpoint, emotionally, cognitively, or some people experience all of those things, right? So, how has it really impacted you on the day to day?
So I guess I'll go first because we started this. um, day to day, I wake up and like Jonathan said, and I think Elizabeth is the same situation. We look fine. Um, and I remember probably 5 years ago, maybe more, I had broken my leg or ankle and I was on crutches. And I was at a brain injury conference. Um, and it was very funny because I was on crutches and I, was excited to be there. So I was in a great mood and everyone opened the door for me. Everyone brought the chair out for me. Everyone did everything. And I was like, this is so different because I felt like I've been taking my head with me and dragging it along and looking stargazed at times because of the processing. So people have said to me, you know, Sharon, what's wrong? You have that perplexed look on your face, and you're, you're just like, I'm just, I'm processing it. It takes a little longer. So you're always frustrated, I think. So every day is different. I have to be very organized and I have to plan, and I have a huge calendar um, so that I can write everything down, and I have to follow that. I'm thankful for GPS. I could never get anywhere without it. Um, and I have to be very diligent about what I do. And that I think is very, um, it's just not me. I could, it's not. So, yes, is there an acceptance? There's a change. Do I think, how do you accept it? But you also know that there are things out there that are really good for you, and there is a process. So um, and you're grateful for that. Um, I think it's a very difficult balance. I think it is. And um, I think it's a difficult balance.
And I like that you said that it kind of fluctuates day to day as well, like the challenges, the maybe how intense those challenges are.
Absolutely. So sleep is
Yeah.
imperative. And nobody talks about that. Well, I shouldn't say that, but when I was dealing with this, I didn't understand. And you learn a lot, and you find out that there are support groups, and that information is difficult to find, I think, because maybe just because you're not used to asking for help and you haven't gone down that path. I think if you've never needed to go down that path before, all of a sudden starting to do it is hard. It's difficult to accept. But information was key. Nothing was, and sleep was imperative, and eating well and drinking plenty of water and resting, because you've used your brain in a different way. So I know that when I went to treatment, I would come back from treatment and I stayed at a friend's because she said, you're going to have trouble getting back home because you're going to be so exhausted. And, the exhaustion and the fatigue. And I don't think people understand. That was one thing that I found. I found all of that hard. And I don't know if there's an explanation. I don't know if you sit down with, I don't know. I know that that's part of my recovery. And that's part of my everyday being now. And that will never change.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. And you did a little extra credit because not only did you say the daily challenges, you kind of highlighted knowing what things like when it does fluctuate, sleep, nutrition, when those things are on point, maybe the day looks I'm not going to say easier because it's never really easy, but it looks a little bit different in terms of the challenges that you're seeing. So you did extra by
I'm going to interrupt because I think daily exercise is absolutely imperative. And it's not that I love exercise, but even just walking, but you have to do something every single day. And that's just, it's a good thing for everyone, but you have to do that.
Yeah. I think you said that you don't like exercise. I think many people share that sentiment of not liking, but it's got so many great benefits,
Yes.
health-wise, mentally, all the things. So
Yes.
yes, good plug. Jonathan or Donna, I don't know if anyone has a preference of who wants to kind of share next, how brain injuries impacted their day to day.
I could go next. I think for me, I had mentioned before about the isolation and the lack of ability to live the life I lived before. Um, and now, luckily, I've gotten back to my exercise. I go to the gym at least 4 times a week. I play pickleball a couple of times a week. I've gotten back to my social activities. I've been very fortunate. And I remember one of my last visits with my neuropsychiatrist. She said and I had asked her, I said, I feel the need to get back to my life. And she said, you're doing well. Get back to your life. That's the most important piece of this. And I mean, as Sharon said, exercise is so important. And I don't go because I like it like everyone else. And I don't go because I want cut arms or whatever. I go for my mental health. And it's so important for that. Um, it really helps to put me in a better place to start my day on the right foot. Um, I'm still struggling with memory a little bit, but from what I understand, that could take up to a year, maybe more. Um, and I think the biggest, challenge for me on a daily basis is confidence. I've lost a lot of that, you know, that confidence that I had before. And I'll give you an example. I don't know if I mentioned my son and his family live in Boston. And, I would go up periodically to see them. I was there for Thanksgiving, and my son would not let me drive. He wanted me to take the train. And usually when I go see them, I bring food and I bring gifts and I bring, things to help them. And because that's what makes me happy, right? They both work full time. My granddaughter is under 2. Um, so that taking the train thing was a real, like, buzz killer for me, so to speak. It really, just kind of added to that lack of confidence piece. I will be driving to Boston this weekend on Saturday for the first time since my brain injury. And I have a bit of a cold, you could probably hear, but other than that, uh, I want it to be the way it used to be. I want to be able to pack that car and, bring that food that I'm cooking and get up there and help them in any way I could, like I used to. And that's what I'm aiming for. But there's still a small piece of me that's afraid, that's, you know, in the back of my mind, it's like, should I really be driving? But I got clearance to drive back in November just to take more stops. It's not like it's 15 hours away. It's 4.5. Um, but that confidence, it's not at the level it used to be. And that's tough.
To take those steps towards things that, again, that period of time trying to reattempt some of those things that yeah, and maybe some fear about like what, if I can't, then what, I think there's some confidence, there's some feared stuff, and I think that's most people are feeling those, a mixed bag of emotions as you try to reattempt some of the things that happened that you were doing before the injury. So that's a challenge, yeah, for sure, as you go through your day-to-day life, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Jonathan, anything you'd like to share day to
Sure.
day?
Um, Going off of what Donna just said, like I have struggled with sort of my self-worth and my confidence. Like I I regularly have seen neuropsychologists and psychologists, and I was telling the psychologist I see now that, I'm like, I don't know, what do I have to offer to like my friends now? And she said, give me an example. And I said, well, since I haven't worked in a while, my computer skills are poor. And she said, Jonathan, your friends don't decide whether they like you or not by how much you know about a computer. And just hearing somebody say that made me realize, that like I still have everything about myself to offer that I had before my brain aneurysm is still there. But it's, it's I sometimes feel like I'm a little kid or treated like a little kid. Like I can't do, there are definitely things, plenty of things that I need help doing, that are just sort of what you would consider just basic functions of life. But so that it's tough to accept that. I also, like I mentioned, I have 4 kids who live in Alabama. I used to live down there, but I had to come up here for more doctors and stuff. And so I struggle with not being like a good parent to my children. And so that's something that, over time I've learned to accept that I'm doing the best I can. I need to still be alive and be healthy to be a good parent to my kids. And that I'm being in New Jersey and seeing the doctors I see here help me to be that person. Um, and also as far as exercise too, I walk maybe 5 or 6 times a week. And I've always said I walk as much for my mental health as for my physical health. I think that, it's really important. And I have very serious memory issues. I'm constantly repeating myself. I often, every time I start a story, I may have told you this before, and I'd say 9 out of 10 times I have told people that story. And I also live by myself now, and I for for a while when it was by my choice, I was okay with it, but now it gets lonely. I mean, I've had trouble main, maintaining relationships with friends and family, and um, like my closest friends they're my lifelong friends. I've known them forever. And when I do talk to them, it's like, we talked just yesterday, but still I have trouble maintaining like up to date relationships. And I love to at some point get back to work, but I have um, one of my worst symptoms is neurofatigue. I suffer from very bad neurofatigue, and I say neurofatigue is to me so much worse than just like you're exhausted from physical activity because it's like your brain almost shuts off, and if I try to overexert myself, then it might take days to recover from two extra minutes of exerting myself. So that's difficult. And again, I have what's called my brain floods. Like my receptors in my brain don't really work anymore. So I if there's like two people talking at once, it causes me often to flood, which it's very taxing on the body, and it's very difficult to deal with, and it's very difficult to explain. And I would imagine it's like a terrible panic attack, is what I would imagine. I've never really had a panic attack, but like it hurts, like, and it exhausts me. I have to fall asleep afterwards, and so it's mainly because of the flooding and the neurofatigue, which is why still 16 years later I can't work.
That's a huge impact to your day to day
Yeah,
because you're experiencing neurofatigue. It kind of dictates like how much you can do. It limits
correct.
you in some ways, right? So, and then you mentioned, being a father, being a friend, those things changing or roles. Let's talk about, which is, thank you for the segue in terms of our next question, which is, um, we're talking about identity, right? Like father, working, like your occupation. Um, how has your sense of identity changed since your injury? Loaded question. Hard for a lot of people. So, if you could share a little bit about your thoughts on your identity and how that's changed.
I mean, I, like I stated earlier, like I feel like a child, and in some ways, and it's difficult. I'm a 51-year-old man, and I had a full life and did things before my aneurysm that I can't do now. And I'm sorry, let me look at my notes here. And yeah, so again, like I said, I struggle with what I have to offer to anybody. Whether it's a friend, a family member, a possible dating, person, and yeah.
Yeah.
So
So being so in some ways a provider, whether that's of support or
yes,
something to someone else that you have that kind of has shifted, or at least you feel that you can't provide maybe as many things as you did before the injury.
if I could say one thing too about, as you know, I'm in this peer mentor program for the Brain Injury Association, and so um, the guy who I was matched with, I got a call one time from his sister, and his sister's like, Jonathan, I need your advice. How do I deal with him with this and that? And just somebody asking me my advice on something, and then like going with what I have to say, just meant so much to me because it had been so long since I feel like I've been asked my advice, and then people have taken what I've said, and not just, oh, he's just a brain injury guy. So That was very big for me in my sort of long-term recovery.
Right. Yeah, you shifted. You were able to provide.
Right.
Right. Cool. I think that's cool.
Thanks.
Sharon, do you want to share?
Um, Identity. Yeah, it's, I'm a different person. Um, I used to run a business in Manhattan. So I, and I keep thinking I can do that, although I don't want to go back to Manhattan. But um, I think it's really, it's difficult on acceptance. And like Jonathan said, when people ask you for help or ask your advice on this, I'm like thrilled because I'd be happy to share my experiences, because I want to make it easier for others who go through it. I don't want it to be as hard as it was for me. Um, and I'm not in a woe is me situation, but I do think that getting help and so that you can get better. And I will always have a brain injury, but um, I don't want people to think that's the only thing that there is to me. Um, and I do have something to offer. And I have experience to offer that's in a different way. No one's going to ask me for directions, and that's fine. I wasn't good with directions before my brain injury, so I'm certainly, nobody asked me for them before. So, um, and so you want to be able to help, and you want to be able to show different people a different way and an easier way. And as Jonathan said, neurofatigue is a huge issue, and it's different than anything. I found that I read everything that I could. I read studies. I my new thing was, I would be reading some medical study on brain injury on a Saturday night. I was very excited. And I, it did pique something in me. So I'm grateful for that. But, you have to find different things, and you have to remember, I think one of the things that my neuropsychologist said to me, you have to stop, think, and plan, and STP. And I have, STP on my wall, and I have to do that. That's the only way. That's the only way I will make it, and I know that.
Yeah, and what you said, you're a person with brain injury, right? You don't want maybe it to be perceived that that's all you are. You have other things to offer, and it sounds like you went through a shift. Like I feel like a lot of people do maybe dive into the brain injury, read all the things to try to get themselves better. But then you come to kind of realize, I want to maybe be more than just that. I want to be a person with brain injury. So person first, right? And so you have other things to offer. So
And,
it seems like a shift
yeah,
in the identity as you go through the recovery.
and you have to ask for help, and that's a big thing that I have trouble with. Um, and you have to, I know there are certain roadblocks that stop me, and I have to ask for help, and I'm not good at that. I don't know, because I was very capable before, and it is sort of that I'm not capable, but I am. I'm just, it's different. Um, it's different.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what we said in the very beginning. It's an acceptance. There's an acceptance of a new me. But, when we're, 60, aren't we a different me than we were when we were 20? I hopefully am. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Yes.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. And that asking for help is so important. And
And
it makes
people want to help.
yes, people
People
do want to
really
help.
want to help.
Yep. And it was making me think of when you said before, when I think you said you hurt your foot or your ankle or a lower extremity and you had something visible. So you didn't have to ask. I think that's the biggest hurdle is to do that ask. So isn't it nice when people see and can assume what you need and then do the thing? But when you really have that first part of asking and people want to help with it, a lot of times with brain injury, they don't know the right thing to say or they don't know how to help. And so, asking for it is the biggest piece of that all because they want to, they just don't know how. And you want the help, but you don't know how to ask. And so it's this roadblock, this intersection we come to of like, who's gonna go first? So thank you but asking for help is super important.
Can I just
Um,
say one thing on top of that? I always say like just because we're not wearing a cast on our head doesn't mean that something wasn't broken in there, you know? They say you don't expect somebody with a cast on to run a marathon. So don't expect somebody with a brain injury. It's these I forgot the word, but like just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep, definitely. Donna, anything that you want to speak to in terms of identity shifts or changes since your injury?
I think for me, two things. I think it's made me uh, uh, a person of more gratitude
Mm.
since the injury happened, because I know it could have been a lot worse. I mean, I had come across the statistic a couple of months ago about falling being the number one death for older folks, 65 and older. And I was like, what? Like, and I'm getting chills as I even speak those words. Because I'm 64, I'll be 65 in August. And I have a lot of gratitude and I'm thankful for, you know, being in the place I am now, given where I was. Um, Also, in terms of my identity, it's helped me to slow down. I was always running before, physically, mentally, go, go, go. And it's helped me to take a step back. And I think in a good way. I think a lot of that running was running away from things, right? Running, not just running to things, but kind of, running away from that loneliness. So I have to be out there. I have to always, be doing things, be seeing people, be talking to people. I don't do that anymore. I've learned to be happy, on my couch, streaming a good show on a Friday night. And that's okay. It's okay. It's doesn't mean I'm a boring person because I might be out Saturday or I might be out Sunday. It's again being, having that gratitude for where you are and trying to learn, right, from your experience, rather than seeing it as a completely, negative thing. What can I learn having been there? And how's that going to get me to go someplace better?
Mhm. Huh. To
Mm.
change your perspective and your appreciation. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Um, I have two more questions for you guys. Um, my second to last being, we've talked about the challenges, changes and shifts in identities. And you kind of alluded to like support groups and things, but what strategies, supports, adaptations, have you found that help you the most, let's say?
Mm.
Oh, I'll start. I now I go to this program called Opportunity Project,
Mm.
which is sort of it's called a clubhouse model, like rehabilitation place, and it's fantastic. I can't say enough good things about it, and it really helps you being a brain injured person to feel like you're just a normal person, part of society again. Um, it, it's 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 group therapy, and the first rule that they tell you there is if you have a question about something, ask another what they call as members rather than somebody who works there. And they're all they go on funding. And so anytime they get any funding, not only do they ask us what we think the funding should go towards, but they actually do it, use it towards it, and listen to us. And as brain injured people, I think one word I think you used, Sharon, like um, I think people don't realize that people with brain injury are still capable. Just it's that simple, you know. And so going there and support groups, I think are wonderful. I think seeing, like I said, I've seen psychologists and a neuropsychologist is wonderful. I've had a couple of what are called neuropsychological evaluations done, and it was amazing to have those results read to me. And it, every sort of deficit that I have lines up exactly with what brain injury I had and where it affects my brain. So it, it, it's two-pronged. First of all, it makes you almost feel better about yourself because like this is stuff that should happen to me. And then often, like I said, in my case, people think that I'm just making things up. And so, you know, you almost start to drink the Kool-Aid, like maybe I am making up, but no, this is exactly what is supposed to be unfortunately happening to me. And I think, like I have my parents as caregivers. I think having a great caregiver who, it really helps. Surrounding yourself with people who genuinely care about you and want what's best for you, and at the same time, like I said before, cutting people out of your life who aren't good for you, being your own best advocate, and um, I think um, maybe even journaling or t talking about things, not keeping things in, just finding people who are willing to listen and might offer advice, and just sort of being honest with yourself.
Right. Quality over quantity. It sounds like when you cut people out
Very
that
much so.
aren't the greatest quality in terms of supporting you, and then keeping that close network of really quality supporters. And if support groups happen to be that for a lot of people, um, which we do have support groups as a little plug. So if people are interested in that, I encourage them to get in touch with us about that. So thank you for sharing, Jonathan. It sounds like a lot of different ways that you've kind of adapted
Definitely.
and built your support system. Um, Sharon, do you want to share strategy supports?
So I think strategies, I've sort of, I think one thing with my brain injury that I've had peaks and valleys, and and that has been different to adjust to. Um, Several years ago, I really had a valley, and um, to keep, you have to keep that in place. And I think you have to work hard um, to keep focused. Um, and you do need a good support system, and you only need to have not only positive people, but you kind of people need to be more forgiving. And we live in a different era. Um, it would be nice if people were just kind. Um, I think you brought it up again, but when I broke my ankle and was on crutches, the difference was dramatic. And I don't want people to kowtow to me or anything like that. But, when people run because they can see it. We have an invisible injury. People don't see it. We're not going to wear a sign. Um, but I do think that gratitude and kindness and seeing how we can achieve those goals with those people and do it in a different way. We have to live our lives differently, and we have to be very protective of ourselves. And as opposed to being always there for someone, I can't do that anymore. But maybe I don't want to, and that's in acceptance. And I know in the past couple of months, I've sort of had. I mean, even now, it's going to be um, it's 15 years after the accident. It'll be 10 years from my diagnosis next month. Um, things have changed dramatically in the past 10 years, and there have been peaks and valleys. Um, and I guess life is hard. I remember my grandmother used to saying that. And it is. That doesn't mean it's negative. It's, maybe the word challenging would have been a better word to use. But you do always adjust. It's, you do. And I think there's a gratitude journal. And one thing that I have done, and I don't have it here, but there's like a little notebook that starts what you're happy about every day. And, at the beginning of the day, and if I don't do this, I'm in trouble. So at the beginning of the day, you write what are you most pleased with or what you want out of the day. And at the end of the day, in bed, I sit there and I write down, what I kind of come back to what happened during the day. And that's a little, that gives you, that gives me some grace. And, maybe I'll sleep better at night. So, but I think those little things help.
Yeah, definitely. Also, like a grounding thing every night that you do to reflect and be mindful of like mindful in the day. It kind of sets yourself up for the day,
Right.
your intentions. So it's a great tip. Thank you, Shannon. Donna, anything you'd like to share in terms of strategies, supports, or adaptations that have helped you so far?
Yeah, I think I think the most important thing that I heard or learned uh, during the healing process was what I mentioned my neuropsychiatrist said about um, go back to assuming the life you had. You may not be able to carry things to the point that you did before, but it'll start to feel like, I think Jonathan mentioned the new normal. And it has, I can't, like I used to take sometimes 2, 3 classes a day at the gym. Yeah, I'm not really there. Will I ever be there? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Um, but just trying to kind of capture and regain that part of your life where you felt like you were strong and in a good place. I think that that helped me adapt. I think in terms of support, when you're by yourself, it's a bit of a challenge, but I think you have to surround yourself with people who are, conscious of what happened, understand what happened. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I joined the Brain Injury Alliance, because I think one of the most important things is to raise awareness around what it means, right? Because, if you have someone close to you that has a brain injury, it's very important that you understand what it means. And I felt like when I was going through it, the most important person in my life, my son, did not understand. And he was angry because I wasn't where I was before.
Mm.
I remember visiting him around Thanksgiving and him constantly watching me go up and down the stairs in his house and saying, "I'm watching you. Make sure you hold on." Um, and that's tough. So I think now that I've regained some of that connectivity with my old life has really helped me to move forward.
Yeah, and I think having that, I don't know if you said it was neuropsychiatrist or psychologist, that a good team that will help support you in returning to do those things. Because it might look different for some people on how they engage in those activities, but a good care team can help you get back to there one way or another with adaptations, accommodations, or it looking a little bit different. But you don't know until you try, right? I think is where so trying with the support of a good care team and others can be a big step. So thank you.
Can I just add two real quick points? I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Just going off of what Donna said, like, before my aneurysm, I wanted to be a TV writer, and I was getting close, and then I had my aneurysm, and I just after my aneurysm sort of gave up on writing. I said I just can't do that anymore. And then a couple of years ago, I just started writing about my experience, and I was like, you know what, I can write again, and getting that back just meant so much to me because that was, something that I thought I had lost. And to, I say I'm not doing it as a career, but just for myself, it's so important to get back to things that you had before your injury and realizing that you can still do things. And then my second point, I just wanted to bring up real quick about like strategies and stuff. When you have like say a big project, instead like for instance, I was looking to buy an apartment, and instead of setting that as my goal, I broke that down into say like 25 different steps. The first step was just looking online, just and checking those steps off and not throwing yourself a party, but allowing yourself to be proud of yourself when you finish a step. It doesn't seem so overwhelming. And a lot of things I think with a brain injury seem overwhelming. And I just there was this one little, I don't know, it was like a meme or that I saw one time. It had two people climbing up a ladder, and one had a ladder had like a prong every foot, and one had one every like 10 feet. And the one who had every 10 feet never got it after the first over the first prong, and the other one was able to climb up because you break it down and it doesn't seem so overwhelming. Thank you for the time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mm. Huge point, because I think, um, what I hear from people is they have really lofty goals like that they want to get to, but you kind of have to be mindful of how the small steps in between them. There's SMART goals. Don't ask me what the acronym. It's an acronym.
Yeah.
No, a lot of OTs and therapists use it. Small, measurable, attainable, right? You start small to get to those larger goals. Um, so thank you for mentioning that, because I think
Sure.
maybe a lot of people tuning in are wondering what are next steps? How can I get back to these things or these goals I have? And kind of the best way to do it is in increments, small steps. Um, well, I'm gonna wrap up with one more thing, given that it is Brain Injury Awareness Month. We talked about, difficulty with people understanding brain injury. And so, is there something you wish people understood better about brain injury?
As I said before, I want people to know that we're still capable, we're still intelligent, and I heard this about people with depression. I think it relates to brain injury too. Uh, People with brain injury aren't lying when they say that they can't do something. They're often lying when they say they can do something because they wanted to feel accepted. And I think that also we can still accomplish many things, and let us try. If it's not going to kill us, let us try it. And if we make a mistake, then we'll ask for help. But let us be able to make those mistakes, and let us feel like we're still a, a, a human being and an adult, and independent. I think you lose your independence a lot with brain injury, and so I think people should try to allow us to get that back and know that we're capable of getting it back.
Well said.
Thank you.
I second everything Jonathan said, and he said it so very well and so eloquently. Um, and if I could add to that, I would say be kind, you know, be kind to the patient that has the injury, and understand that it takes time. You know, it's nobody recovers from it overnight. It's a process, and try to be patient. Um, that was the thing that kind of sort of hurt me the most with my son, but he was dealing with it from another perspective, you know, seeing his parent in that position. And, you know, I think sometimes when you go through that, when it's your kids looking at you, it kind of speaks to the mortality piece, right? So I try to understand that piece of, you know, why he reacted the way he did. But I think it's so important to, you know, just be kind and do some research, you know, because that'll help you learn about what the person is going through. And that's going to help you uh, support them the best way that you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, Donna made a really good point there. You both made, Jonathan and Donna made some really good points, and Elizabeth has certainly helped us navigate through this topic. There are two things that I haven't said, and I would be remiss not to, is that different yoga. And I think one of the things that I have been able to do through this process is to look at things that are not westernized. Um, and so yoga and different kinds of therapies, I've gone to a lot, and they've all helped in different ways. And it has opened my mind. And I think that, you know, that's been one of the really good things of this, is that I've seen um, how everything can work. Um, and yes, it is being open and kind, and, you know, being able to laugh. I laugh. I have a distinctive laugh. I know that. Um, and I do laugh a lot because I think a lot of it's funny, and I laugh at the, you know, at the idiocy of my brain at times, and I will just sit there and laugh. And I'm sure people think I'm crazy, and that's fine. But it gets me through the day. Um, so I think being open, and just trying new things. I mean, if someone had said to me, I would be very into sound therapies and different kind of cranial sacral therapies, all these different therapies that I've tried, and all the people along the way that I've met, um, and, you know, all the scientists I've met who have devoted so much time and effort to us. You know, it's a whole different world, and I do think what Donna said is gratitude is a big thing. Um, and, you know, maybe the three of us can share that we are probably all lucky to be alive. Um, and yes, I, you know, wish that things, you know, things are just different. Things happen. Life is challenging. And, but it's good that we're here. So that's really good. So
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
my thought.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to do my best to summarize what I think I just gathered in terms of what we all wish people understood about brain injury better. Is that, Sharon, when I'm hearing no cookie cutter approach, we think about PTOT and speech, but there's so many alternative therapies that can really be helpful to people living with brain injury. I'm hearing lead with kindness, patience, gratitude as someone living with a brain injury. And then, you know, I think the underlying is that people with brain injury are capable, right? Um, so I think those are great things for people to know, and I hope that people tuning in are learning about brain injury. I want to again thank my wonderful panelists here, Sharon, Donna, and Jonathan, for sharing, being open. We really appreciate you sharing your thoughts, your stories. And we hope that it kind of struck a chord with people tuning in and that they've learned at least one thing from everything you've shared. And again, those tuning in, I want to remind you it's Brain Injury Awareness Month. So please, engage in all of the wonderful events that we're hosting. Become an advocate for people living with brain injury. Get out there, be involved in what Donna said, learn, right? Make an effort to learn more about brain injury. So thank you guys so much again.
Thank
Thank you
you,
guys for
Elizabeth.
tuning in.
Thank you so
Thank
much. Thank
you.
you,
Thank
everybody.
you,
Thank you,
Elizabeth,
Thank you,
very
opportunity.
Elizabeth.
much. Thank
Absolutely.
you
Take
all.
care, everyone.